Week 11 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few running backs I have as sleepers this week. The first guy, Preston Ebner of the Chicago Bears. So now Khalil Herbert, he's on IR for 4 weeks at least with a hip injury. And we know this bad backfield, they like to use 2 running backs for the most time, but I do believe David Montgomery is going to get an opportunity to get a lot of carries in this ball game here at the Atlanta Falcons in Week 11. But Ebner right now available 98% of fantasy leagues. He's a decent receiver out of the backfield. Then he's going to be a change of pace back as well, I believe, obviously for the Chicago Bear team. So the last few games here for Ebner, he really hasn't seen the field like I mentioned. But now with Herbert out, this is a guy that could catch the ball out of the backfield. I think we'll see him get some work in this ball game at Atlanta. Like I said, Montgomery, he really hasn't been putting up the big numbers this year here. And right now, if you're in a real pinch at the running back position with buys and injuries, he's available in 98% of fantasy leagues. Next guy's Alexander Mattison of the Minnesota Vikings. So Madison, he really hasn't gotten that much work over the last few weeks here as the backup to Dalvin Cook. And this week here, it's going to be a physical ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys. I know the Cowboys give up the 4th least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season, but the last couple weeks here, teams have been running on this Dallas Cowboy team, especially the Packers. What a great game plan it was for them, and they ran over 150 yards in that game. So the last few games here for Madison, Week 8 versus Arizona, 5 carries, 40 yards, a touchdown. Week 9 at the Commanders, 2 carries, a yard, and a catch in that one for no yards. And then Week 10 at Buffalo, 3 carries, 11 yards, and a catch for 8 yards. So right here, obviously, the workload hasn't been there. But he's still a guy that if you're in a pinch, it wouldn't be surprising to me if we see Cook go down at some point this season here, where Madison's got to step in and be the starter a couple games. And you never know, this week it could be that. Cook's been playing with a shoulder injury for the most part this season here. And Madison right now still available in 62% of fantasy leagues. And he's a sleeper option this week. In the third and final running back I have as a sleeper is Latavius Murray of the Denver Broncos. So Latavius Murray, he's not really getting a lot of respect in around fantasy football circles here. I still think he's the main man over there in Denver. At worst case, he's still the goal line and short yardage back. And he's put in at least some decent performances. Right now available in 77% of fantasy leagues. Week 7 versus the Jets, 8 carries, 24 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches, -1 yards. Week 8 at Jacksonville in that one, he had a good ball game. 14 carries, 46 yards, a touchdown, a catch for 13 yards in London. And then Week 10 at Tennessee in that one, 9 carries, 24 yards, 3 catches, 23 yards. So this week here, a good matchup for Latavius Murray versus the Vegas Raiders that give up the 4th most fantasy points to running backs on the season. And obviously with Latavius Murray, a former Raider many seasons ago, this might be a ball game where he wants to stick it to one of his former teams here. Like I mentioned, he's been a solid running back over the last few years. In the last 5 years, he's top 5 in touchdowns at the running back position. And this week here, like I said, versus the Raiders, I think we're going to see him get opportunity. Him and Melvin Gordon in the backs. Chase Edmonds really hasn't done anything. And Murray this week, I have as a sleeper. So that's a few running backs I have as sleeper options for Week 11 of the fantasy football season.